think it's a big part of economics and understanding who we are, is that even though I think somebody should do something differently, it doesn't mean that they were acting irrationally. It's just that maybe they didn't make the choice that I would have made. And when we start putting our choices onto other people, now we have an aggression, we have a coercion that's taking place, and that breaks us from the free market economy. Hello, my name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, we've got a lot to talk about today. There's been a lot happening in the news and everything else, but I still want to get back to the basics, the economic basics, Econ 101, something that I used to teach in my economic courses, whether I be at Texas Tech or Sam Houston State University or other places, or even in the internships. Whenever I would do those at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, others, I would talk about the philosophy of freedom and the economic way of thinking and that sort of thing. And when you look at these things, I think it's important to get back to the basics. I see too many people throwing out ideas that are not based on sound economics. They're based more on politically what's popular or what's possible versus what's the North Star? Where should we be heading? And those are some of the things that I want to talk about to you today. So hopefully you're doing well. Let's get right to it, all right? So look, there's a growing narrative that blames free market economics for economic challenges, but the truth is precisely the opposite. Markets are the solution, not the scapegoat. We should remember that. Alarmingly, even voices on the right, longtime defenders of market freedom, in some sense, are embracing the idea that new waves of government spending and industrial policy will bring back jobs, rebuild the middle class, unhollow out the Rust Belt, and restore American greatness. But don't be fooled. These are progressive ideas dressed up in fresh, conservative, quote unquote, conservative language. What's being proposed isn't a real solution. It's a return to failed policies of the past. To push back effectively, we must return to the basics, Econ 101. Markets work, and we are better off when we allow them to do so. In today's episode of This Week's Economy, we're going to explore how human action drives the marketplace, how markets communicate vital information, and how freedom and responsibility together create prosperity. These foundational lessons will better equip us to promote policies that truly let people prosper. Remember, you catch the full episode on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, or visit my website, vanceginn.com, or my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. It's because this is a reader-supported issue. Check those out. Become a subscriber today. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so let's get right into it, all right? Number one, are humans rational? What do you think? Well, do people act rationally and in their best interest? Well, economics generally assumes that individuals act purposefully and in their best interest. But that doesn't always mean that they have to behave in ways that appear, quote unquote, rational to others. Great thinkers have long argued that while humans are driven by self-interest, including Adam Smith and many others, they have not always made decisions that seem logical or rational from the outside. You have a good quote here by Ludwig von Mises, one of my favorite economists, who says, quote, human action is purposeful behavior. Action is will put into operation, transforms into an agency, is aimed at ends and goals, is the ego's meaningful response to stimuli and to the conditions of its environment, is a person's conscious adjustment to the state of the universe that determines his life, end quote, by Ludwig von Mises. You also have another good one by Gene Callahan. Quote, the wellspring of human action is dissatisfaction. Or, if you want to see the glass as half full, the idea that life might be better than it is at the present, end quote. Look, humans make countless choices every single day. I know you do as well. I know I do. Each of those decisions involve trade-offs. The real cost of any decision is the opportunity cost. What we give up in order to choose something else. It's the next best alternative is that opportunity cost. So it's not just the direct cost that you pay, but it's also this indirect cost that's kind of looming behind all the decisions that we make. You too are thinking like an economist. You may not even know it. Nothing is truly free. Time or money spent on one thing means less time or money for something else. That's opportunity cost in action. People value different things. We have subjective values. They're not objective. A choice that seems irrational to one person may make perfect sense to someone else based on their preferences, needs, information, or circumstances. Differences really are what drive the economy. Our unique preferences and abilities allow for specialization, trade, borrowing, lending, and cooperation, the foundations of a thriving economy. Why does this matter? Well, it's because we just because we don't fully understand someone's choices doesn't mean they're irrational. When governments try to quote unquote correct what their view is as rational behavior, or restricting choice or limiting freedom, they often cause more harm than good. These policies can lead to unintended consequences, inefficiencies, and a loss of liberty. Liberty means not just freedom, but responsibility, the freedom to choose and the commitment to live with the outcomes of those choices. There's different brands or schools of economics. One of those is behavioral economics. To me, those two terms don't really need to go together because economics is about human behavior. So they're kind of the same thing. But I think this behavioral economics kind of came around and really tried to bring a different look at economics, maybe in some sense getting us back to the roots of economics, which talked a lot about by the Austrian school and Chicago school. But the difference is that behavioral economics, whether it be Kahneman or Tversky, a number of them that are out there. Cass Sunstein has written a book on this. Some of them even call it libertarian paternalism, where there's some sort of allowing for markets to kind of nudge you in certain directions from government policy to put you in the right place. And some of these seem to make sense, especially in the private sector, whenever you have people who are opting out of the default of being in a 401k plan instead of having to opt in. That has influenced people to save more, which may be good. It could actually be distorting their choices and making it worse, but at least that could be a way to use it. There's also been discussion about having items right at the checkout when you go to the supermarket. That also is kind of a nudge saying, hey, buy me right before you check out. Those are kind of things. But I also think it's important to look at behavioral economics as being a way to control people and not allowing the free market to work. And a big reason for that is that they assume in behavioral economics that people are irrational, that they're not going to make the best decisions given the resources and information and other things that I mentioned before out there. Well, in order to do that, they run a lot of experiments, and it's really actually quite fascinating, some of the things that they can do. But I argue and have for a long time that behavioral economics is really about government control. And the reason why is because it's ignoring the individual, the subjective valuations of the individuals making those choices. And it's being determined by, the choices are being determined by a third party who does not have objective valuation, that has many other costs and benefits that go into the analysis. And their choices are not going to be the same as someone else. And so when you start looking at it from this perspective, this prism of behavioral economics, I think it's actually getting away from economics in some sense because people are rational beings. And we may not like every choice that they make, which I mentioned, but they're still acting rationally. And I think it's a big part of economics and understanding who we are, is that even though I think somebody should do something differently, it doesn't mean that they were acting irrationally. It's just that maybe they didn't make the choice that I would have made. And when we start putting our choices onto other people, now we have an aggression, we have a coercion that's taking place, and that breaks us from the free market economy. And I think that there are actually worse outcomes when people can't make their own decisions because they lose agency, they lose responsibility in their own life, and that's not a good thing. All right. So I do believe that people are rational, that they act in their own best self-interest, but that self-interest also helps out the people around them, or they wouldn't be able to trade and do business and everything else. So I think it's a key part of economics. Number two, do markets work? We live in a world of scarcity. Using limited means to pursue desired ends always involves trade-offs and cost. The value and cost of goods are determined by how much people want them, kind of the demand and their ability to buy them, and their availability, the supply. This is the foundation of how markets operate. The real price of everything, this is a quote, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it is the toil and trouble of acquiring it, end quote, by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations in 1776. So some real world examples to think about is that prices contain a lot of information based on the choices of many, many people. And these prices give us signals as to supply the demand for a product. People will make choices accordingly. It's hard to beat the market. We can see that in the stock market, but even in the marketplace itself, it's difficult to beat. Despite its flaws, and there are some, the market is still more rational than you, the decision maker, the politician, the ones who want to put more of their subjective valuation onto other people, given a lot of interest group and rent seekings and everything else that are forcing them in that direction relative to being about sound decisions made by, economic way of thinking. So why does this matter? Well, prices are more than numbers. They're signals. They reflect real-time information about scarcity, value, and consumer preferences. When governments distort these signals through price controls, subsidies, or tariffs, or many other things, inefficiencies follow. Historical and contemporary evidence shows that empowering individuals in free markets leads to more effective, efficient, and liberty-preserving outcomes, or in other words, to let people prosper. All right. Number 3, how do people and markets work together? Well, humans act in their interest within the marketplace, pursuing goals or ends that they value. Economics assumes people make purposeful choices to achieve those ends, and it studies the consequences of those choices. Importantly, the value of any good or service is subjective. It depends on how much someone values it, not simply on how much labor or material went into it. That's more the Marxist sort of view, the labor theory of value. So value isn't inherent in an object or based solely on the time or resource used to make it. Instead, it's based on how much people want their good or service. This is known as subjective value. In the marketplace, people choose by weighing options and deciding whether to search further or buy something now. But searching has a cost too. For example, the effort of looking at dozens of homes may eventually outweigh the benefit of finding the, quote, perfect one. This is known as the paradox of choice. Why does this matter? Well, what I value may not be what you value, and that's okay. Markets allow for this diversity of preferences. However, when governments intervene and try to direct choices, such as subsidizing one energy source over another, they distort consumers' ability to decide what best meets their needs. Free markets work best when individuals choose based on their values and their goals. All right? It's really important to allow for markets to work. Number 4, applying economic principles today. We must recognize that markets work and are often more rational actors than humans. Intervention frequently spells disaster as it prevents markets from working. Market signals, well, many assume that diamonds are expensive due to natural rarity, but much of their price stems from controlled supply. Cecil Rhodes, owner of De Beers Mining Company, bought up most of the South African's diamond mines back in the day. By limiting the number of diamonds released to the market, he artificially reduced supply and drove prices up. There still is this diamond water paradox, though, where diamonds are more expensive than water. And it has to do with not only supply, the availability, but also the demand. How much are they in demand? Well, that could depend on the scarcity. Well, diamonds are much scarcer than water. So even when you're looking at the scarcity, that certainly has something to say about why the price is so high, but also has to be in demand. So you can use it. You can use it for many different purposes. And there's also a lot of availability of water. So therefore, and we oftentimes don't have good private sector or property rights around water. And so it's more difficult to price in. I think that's something we need to be looking at in Texas and other places. But this is certainly something we need to keep in mind. You know, spring typically marks the peak of the real estate selling season. But this year, first-time home buyers are shifting focus to smaller homes in response to higher prices, elevated mortgage rates, and limited inventory. Builders are also adjusting, turning to similar or smaller bills to contain rising costs. May's consumer confidence has gotten a lot of attention. This report is based on a survey reflecting how people feel about the economy, not concrete data. Those feelings shift with headlines, elections, inflation, wars, or tariffs, especially in uncertain times. But that uncertainty affects the economy. When business and families aren't sure about taxes, regulation, or inflation, they pause investment and hiring, slowing growth overall. Free markets create the conditions for true confidence and lasting prosperity by offering clear incentives and fewer barriers. You know, government is really the one that distorts the markets. When the government, quote unquote, forgives student loans, it's not free, but instead shifts the burden to taxpayers and future generations, especially those who didn't go to college. When Congress spends trillions of our dollars, those dollars are diverted for the productive uses in the private sector to somewhere else that they think is better. Government assistance like SNAP or food stamps can distort normal market dynamics. Demand shifts towards certain products when recipients are limited in what they can buy. This artificial demand raises prices and profit margins for those specific goods, benefiting a few suppliers while increasing grocery costs for others. You know, in Texas operates a mostly deregulated electricity market, primarily through its ERCOT system. This encourages innovation, lower prices, and responsive supply based on demand signals during normal conditions. However, during the 2021 winter storm, Uri, government interventions such as price caps and poor infrastructure regulation contributed to blackouts. Instead of allowing price signals to drive investment in resilient energy infrastructure like oil and gas, natural gas, policy distortions led to systemic failures. This is why I think that the supposed market failures are really a determination from the external side of things, thinking a third party, if you will, thinking that they know what's best in that market versus what the market participants want happen, whether that be from pollution or environmental factors or other things that we call positive and negative externalities in economics. The long-held view is that the government should intervene to try to, quote, correct those market failures. The problem is that the government doesn't have enough information. And when they start distorting the market and getting us out of prices signaling where resources should go, then we create further problems. And this is one reason why I'm big on noting that there are government failures that are oftentimes missed or overlooked in textbooks and other places. And the government failures are more costly oftentimes than the market failures, the supposed market failures. And so I think we need to be looking at that differently and not considering everything to be market failures or something else, rather that it's the subjective determination of those individuals making the decisions. And economics is more about studying human behavior, as I've talked about before, and we really need to understand this. So in closing, respect for markets is more critical now than ever. Many of our current economic challenges result from government-driven distortions and failures in the marketplace relative to market failures. Prosperity begins by letting people prosper, which starts with letting markets work. We need transparent signals about the availability and value of goods and services so individuals and businesses can make informed decisions and plan for the future. When government interferes with these signals through overspending, tariffs, subsidies, or policies that pick winners and losers, it leads to inefficiency, waste, and widespread harm. So what do we need to do? If we want an economy that truly serves people, not politics, we must get back to basics. Respect markets, limit government, and always remember, let people prosper. So I've got some recommended resources in my show notes page that you should check out, including The Economics for Real People by Gene Callahan, Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, The Moral Meaning of Markets by Ryan Langrel and Virgil Henry Storr, Acting Man by Loid von Mises, Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, Who is More Rational, You or the Market, Marginal Revolution University, and a number of other ones that I hope that you'll go and check out at my Substack newsletter. So thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Econ 101. For more resources and commentary, visit vanceginn.com and subscribe to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com and have me join you at one of your upcoming speeches. I have a list of my services that I provide and everything else over on my website, vanceginn.com. Until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.